I never thought the person who would destroy me would be the same person I saved from destruction. My name is Evelyn Washington. I'm 65 years old, and the moment I realized my granddaughter was stealing my entire life from under my feet, I was standing in my own kitchen holding a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold in my trembling hands. That same granddaughter who I raised alone after my daughter Monica was killed in a car accident 23 years ago, the baby girl who had no one else in the world except me, had just stolen $90,000 from my bank accounts, destroyed my credit, forged my signature on loans against my house, and was planning something even worse, something I would discover hidden in a manila folder that would make my blood run cold. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how a woman who survived poverty, widowhood, and burying her only child could end up being betrayed by the person she loved most in the world. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how deep this betrayal cuts, how it reaches all the way down to the marrow of my bones and twists everything I thought I knew about love and family and sacrifice. 23 years ago, my daughter Monica died in a car accident on Interstate 95. She was 24 years old, beautiful and vibrant and full of dreams she'd never get to fulfill. The drunk driver who slammed into her at 70 miles an hour walked away with minor injuries while my baby girl bled out on the highway, and I got the phone call that every mother prays she'll never receive at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in June. She left behind a 2-year-old daughter named Crystal, a little girl with her mother's wide brown eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin. Crystal's father had disappeared before she was even born, nothing but a name on a birth certificate and a string of broken promises. So when Monica died, when they lowered her casket into the ground on a sunny afternoon that mocked my grief with its beauty, there was no question about what would happen next. Crystal came to live with me in my small house in Southeast Washington, and I became mother and grandmother all at once. I was 42 years old then, working as an administrative assistant at Howard University Hospital, pulling double shifts whenever I could to make ends meet. My husband Raymond had died 5 years earlier from complications of diabetes, leaving me with a mortgage, a pile of medical bills, and a heart that still ached every time I woke up and reached for him in the darkness. But I didn't have time to drown in grief. I had a grandbaby who needed me, who cried for her mama in the middle of the night, who looked at me with those enormous eyes full of confusion and pain that no 2-year-old should have to feel. I gave Crystal everything I had. I worked those double shifts and came home exhausted, my feet swollen and my back screaming, but I still got down on the floor to play dolls with her. I saved every extra penny so she could have dance lessons, piano lessons, tutoring when she struggled with math in middle school. I went without new clothes for years, wore shoes until the soles were so thin I could feel every pebble on the sidewalk, ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have chicken and vegetables and the nutrition a growing girl needed. When she wanted to go to her senior prom, I worked extra shifts for 3 months straight to buy her that beautiful emerald green dress she'd been dreaming about. I can still see her face when she came downstairs that night, can still feel the tears stinging my eyes as I watched her twirl in front of the mirror, radiant and perfect, and so achingly like her mother it nearly broke me. Crystal was a good student, made decent grades, stayed out of the trouble that swallowed up so many kids in our neighborhood. She got accepted to the University of Maryland with a partial scholarship, and I was so proud I thought my heart would burst right out of my chest. I took out loans to cover what the scholarship didn't, told her not to worry about the money, that education was the most important investment we could make. She studied business administration, talked about becoming an entrepreneur, about starting her own company someday. I believed in every word, in every dream. She was going to break the cycle of struggle that had defined our family for generations. She was going to make it. She graduated 4 years ago with honors. I was there in the audience at her graduation, wearing my best Sunday dress and crying tears of pure joy as I watched her walk across that stage and accept her diploma. All those years of sacrifice, all those sleepless nights and aching muscles and pennies scraped together, it was all worth it in that moment. I'd given her the foundation Monica never got to give her, the opportunity to build something beautiful with her life. After graduation, Crystal moved back home while she looked for work. She said it made more sense financially, and I was happy to have her. The house felt too empty without her chatter and her music, and her presence filling up the rooms. She got a job as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup downtown. Nothing fancy, but decent pay with room for advancement. She was dating a young man named Marcus, someone she'd met at university. He seemed nice enough when I met him. Polite, well-dressed, said all the right things. But there was something about his eyes I didn't trust, something calculating and cold that he tried to hide behind those practiced smiles. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just protective of my grandbaby, that I needed to let her make her own choices about love. I should have listened to my instincts. About 2 years ago, things started changing. Small things at first, so subtle I barely noticed. Crystal became more secretive, spent more time in her room with the door closed, started going out more often without telling me where she was going or when she'd be back. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive, tell me I was treating her like a child, that she was 25 years old and didn't need to report her every movement. I backed off because I didn't want to push her away, didn't want to be the overbearing grandmother who couldn't let go. But something in my gut told me things weren't right. Then the financial irregularities started, though I didn't recognize them for what they were at first. I'd go to the ATM to withdraw cash for groceries and find my balance was lower than I expected. Not by much, $50 here, $100 there, amounts small enough that I convinced myself I must have forgotten a purchase or miscalculated my budget. I'd been working at the hospital for over 40 years by then, had built up a decent savings account. Nothing extravagant, but enough to retire comfortably, maybe even help Crystal with a down payment on her own place someday. I checked my statements every month like clockwork, but the small discrepancies didn't set off any alarm bells. I was getting older, I told myself. Maybe my memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be. 6 months ago, I started receiving calls from credit card companies about accounts I didn't remember opening. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a mistake, told the representative they had the wrong number. The second time, I felt a flutter of unease in my chest, but still didn't want to believe what my mind was starting to whisper. The third time, I asked them to verify the account information, and they read back my name, my social security number, my date of birth, all correct. Someone had opened credit cards in my name, 3 of them, with a combined balance of over $15,000. I sat at my kitchen table after that phone call, staring at the floral wallpaper I'd put up the year Crystal came to live with me, and felt the world tilting sideways. Identity theft. I'd heard about it on the news, read articles about criminals who stole people's information and ruined their credit. But how? I was so careful. I shredded documents. I never gave out my social security number over the phone. I barely used the internet except for checking email. How could this happen to me? I reported it to the credit bureaus, started the long process of disputing the fraudulent charges, filed a police report. The detective assigned to my case was a young woman with kind eyes who told me these things happened more often than people realized, that I shouldn't blame myself. But I did blame myself. I felt violated, exposed, vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced before. Someone out there had reached into my life and stolen my identity, my financial security, pieces of my very self. 2 weeks after I filed that police report, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I was cleaning Crystal's room while she was at work. I'd been doing her laundry and tidying up since she moved back home, old habits from raising her, when I saw the corner of a credit card peeking out from under some papers on her desk. It caught my eye because it was one of those metallic cards, shiny and expensive looking, not the kind of card someone with entry-level marketing job would typically have. I pulled it out, telling myself I was just curious, that there was probably a perfectly innocent explanation. The name embossed on that card was mine, Evelyn Ruth Washington. My name on a card I'd never seen before, in my granddaughter's desk drawer. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the card. I stood there in her room, surrounded by the posters and photos and little trinkets I'd bought her over the years, the room I'd painted lavender because it was her favorite color when she was 12, and I felt reality fracturing around me. No, there had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd gotten this card and forgotten about it, given it to her to use for emergencies. Maybe she was holding on to it for me for safekeeping. My mind scrambled desperately for explanations that would make sense, that would mean my Crystal, my baby girl, my granddaughter who I'd raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, hadn't betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. But then I looked closer at the papers the card had been hidden under. Bank statements, in my name, showing withdrawals I'd never made, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, purchases at stores I'd never been to, thousands and thousands of dollars flowing out of my accounts month after month. And there, at the bottom of the pile, was a photocopy of my Social Security card and driver's license. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor, my back against Crystal's bed, the papers scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. Which is what this was, wasn't it? A crime. My own granddaughter had been systematically stealing from me, using my identity to open accounts, racking up debt in my name, draining the savings I'd worked 43 years to accumulate. The girl I'd raised, the girl I'd sacrificed everything for, the girl I loved more than my own life. How long had this been going on? How much had she taken? And why? She had a job. She lived rent-free in my house. I'd never denied her anything she needed. What could possibly drive her to do this to me? I heard the front door open downstairs. Crystal's voice called out, cheerful and casual. "Grandma, I'm home. Want me to start dinner?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't reconcile the voice of the girl I knew with the evidence of theft and betrayal scattered across the floor around me. "Grandma?" Her footsteps on the stairs, coming closer. "You up here?" She appeared in the doorway, still in her work clothes, her purse slung over her shoulder. For just a moment, before she saw what I was holding, before she saw the papers on the floor, her face was open and relaxed, the face I'd known and loved for 23 years. Then her eyes landed on the credit card in my hand, and everything changed. Her expression went blank, carefully neutral, but I saw the flash of panic before she could hide it. "Grandma," she said slowly, "what are you doing in my room?" What was I doing in her room? As if that was the question that mattered, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. I held up the card, my hand still trembling. "This has my name on it," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "Why do you have a credit card with my name on it, Crystal?" She didn't answer right away. I watched her face as she calculated, as she decided what story to tell me. I could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something that could be explained away. My granddaughter had been deliberately, systematically stealing from me, and now she was deciding how much of the truth to admit to. "Grandma, I can explain," she finally said, taking a step into the room. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I asked. "Because what I think is that you've been stealing my identity. I think you've been opening accounts in my name, taking money from my savings, destroying my credit. What I think is that you've been committing fraud against your own grandmother who gave up everything to raise you. So please, Crystal, explain to me what it really is, because I'm having a hard time understanding how it could be anything else." And right then, at that exact moment when my world was crashing down around me, and I was looking at my beloved granddaughter and seeing a stranger, I heard another voice from downstairs. "Baby, you up there? I got those papers you wanted me to—" Marcus appeared behind Crystal, holding a manila folder. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me sitting on the floor, surrounded by evidence, saw the credit card in my hand, saw the expression on my face. His eyes met Crystal's, and something passed between them, some silent communication that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just Crystal. Marcus was involved too. They'd been working together, planning together, stealing from me together. "How much?" I asked, looking back at Crystal. "How much have you taken from me?" She didn't answer. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder, a possessive gesture that made my skin crawl. "Crystal, don't say anything," he said quietly. "Not without a lawyer present." A lawyer. He was talking about lawyers, which meant he knew exactly how serious this was, how illegal, how prosecutable. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was calculated theft, conspiracy, fraud. And the person who'd orchestrated it, who'd used her intimate knowledge of my life and my trust to steal everything I'd worked for, was the girl I'd raised as my own daughter. I need you to understand something before I continue. If you're watching this, and you've ever trusted someone completely, ever loved someone so much you'd give them your last dollar and your last breath, then you know the kind of pain I felt in that moment. It wasn't just about the money, though God knows I'd worked hard for every penny they'd stolen. It was about the betrayal that cut so deep I could feel it in my bones, could taste it like copper in my mouth. The girl I'd raised, the girl I'd sacrificed my entire adult life for, had looked me in the eye day after day while systematically destroying my financial future, my security, my trust. If this story is resonating with you, if you want to hear how this unfolds, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me if you've ever experienced a betrayal that shook your world to its core, because knowing I'm not alone in this pain is the only thing that's gotten me through these dark months. I pulled myself up off that floor, using the edge of Crystal's bed for support because my legs felt like water. I looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her, trying to find some trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after a nightmare, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers, who used to tell me I was the best grandma in the whole world. But all I saw was a stranger wearing a familiar face, standing next to a man who'd helped her rob me blind. "Get out," I said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my house." "Grandma, please," Crystal started, but I cut her off. "Don't call me that. Don't you dare call me that after what you've done. I gave you everything, Crystal. Everything. I worked myself to the bone to make sure you had opportunities I never had, to make sure you wouldn't struggle the way I struggled, the way your mother struggled. And this is how you repay me? By stealing my identity? By ruining my credit? By taking the money I needed for my retirement, for my medical bills, for the basic security every person deserves after 40 years of hard work?" My voice was rising now, all the grief and rage and betrayal pouring out in words that felt inadequate to express the magnitude of what I was feeling. "I trusted you with everything. With my bank information, with my social security number, with access to every private detail of my life, because you were my granddaughter, because I loved you, because I never imagined, not in my darkest nightmares, that you would use that trust to destroy me." Crystal's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another manipulation. "Grandma, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. We just needed a little money to..." "To what?" I demanded. "To what, Crystal? What was so important that you had to steal from your grandmother to get it?" She glanced at Marcus, and he gave a tiny shake of his head, warning her not to say more. That's when I knew there was more to this story, something bigger than just credit cards and bank withdrawals. They'd been planning something, working towards some goal that required my money, my identity, my financial security. "You know what? I don't want to hear it," I said, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I don't want your explanations or your excuses. I want you both out of my house right now. Crystal, you have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. After that, I'm calling the police and pressing charges for identity theft, fraud, and whatever else they can throw at you." "You wouldn't," Crystal breathed, the tears spilling down her cheeks now. "Grandma, I'm family. You wouldn't put me in jail." I looked at her for a long moment. This girl who shared my blood, who I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd repaid that love with the worst betrayal I could imagine. "You stopped being family the moment you decided stealing from me was acceptable," I said. "The moment you looked at me as a victim instead of as the woman who gave you everything. 1 hour, Crystal. Then I'm calling the police." I walked out of that room, down the stairs, into my kitchen where I sat at the table, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped her with homework, where I'd told her stories about her mother. And I felt like I was sitting in a stranger's house, in a stranger's life. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until days later when I went through every bank statement and credit card bill with a fine-toothed comb, was that the betrayal went so much deeper than I could have imagined. Crystal and Marcus hadn't just stolen my identity for credit cards. They'd forged my signature on documents I'd never seen, taken out loans against my house, opened investment accounts in my name, and lost tens of thousands of dollars in risky ventures. They'd stolen over $90,000 from me over the course of 18 months, systematically dismantling the financial security it had taken me a lifetime to build. But I also didn't know that hidden in that manila folder Marcus had been carrying, the one he'd quickly tucked under his jacket when he saw me on the floor, were documents that would reveal just how calculating and cruel their plan had been. Documents that showed this wasn't opportunistic theft, wasn't desperation or poor judgment, but a carefully orchestrated scheme with an ending so sinister it would haunt my nightmares for months to come. An hour later, I heard the front door slam. I walked to the window and watched Crystal and Marcus load suitcases into his car, watched them drive away from my house without looking back. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner, and then I called the police. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't possibly have known as I sat in my kitchen giving my statement to that kind detective who'd warned me about identity theft, was that calling the police would set off a chain of events that would uncover a conspiracy so much bigger than simple theft, involving people I'd trusted for years, revealing secrets that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and my life. And at the center of it all was a document with my forged signature, dated 6 months in the future, that would show me just how far Crystal and Marcus had been willing to go to get what they wanted. The detective who came to my house that night was a tall black man in his mid-40s named Detective James Crawford. He had kind eyes but a serious demeanor that told me he'd seen too many cases like mine. Too many elderly people devastated by family members who saw them as nothing more than ATM machines with emotions. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, recording my statement on a small digital recorder, and I watched his expression grow darker with every detail I revealed. "Mrs. Washington," he said, after I'd finished explaining everything I'd discovered, "I'm going to be completely honest with you. Identity theft cases involving family members are some of the most difficult to prosecute, and they're also some of the cruelest. The emotional damage often exceeds the financial damage by a significant margin." He paused, studying my face. "Are you absolutely certain you want to press charges? Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your granddaughter will have a criminal record. She could face serious prison time." I looked at him, this stranger who was asking me to make a decision that would destroy what remained of my family, and I felt something hard and cold settle in my chest. Detective Crawford, my granddaughter, looked me in the eyes every single day while she was stealing my life savings, my retirement security, my ability to pay for medication and utilities and basic necessities. She smiled at me over breakfast while she was forging my signature on fraudulent documents. She hugged me goodnight while she was planning God knows what else. So yes, I'm absolutely certain I want to press charges. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. He nodded slowly. "I need to collect evidence. Do you still have access to those bank statements and documents you found in her room?" "Everything's still up there. I haven't touched anything since they left." "Good. I'll need to photograph everything, and I'll need you to sign some authorization forms so we can subpoena your bank records and credit card statements." He stood up, pulling latex gloves from his jacket pocket. "Mrs. Washington, I want you to prepare yourself. When we start digging into financial fraud cases, we often find that the situation is more extensive than the victim initially realizes. There may be accounts you don't know about, debts you haven't discovered yet, people involved that you haven't identified." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I led him upstairs to Crystal's room anyway. I stood in the doorway while he methodically photographed the credit card, the bank statements, the photocopied identification documents. He placed everything in evidence bags, labeled and sealed them with practiced efficiency. Then he opened Crystal's desk drawers, and that's when he found the laptop. "Mrs. Washington, did you know your granddaughter kept a personal computer here?" "Yes, but I never looked at it. That was her private property." "Would you consent to us examining it? If she was conducting fraudulent activities, there may be digital evidence, emails, spreadsheets, communications with accomplices." Accomplices. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Yes," I said. "Look at whatever you need to look at." He bagged the laptop and continued searching. In the back of Crystal's closet, behind a stack of shoeboxes, he found a locked metal file box. "Do you know what's in here?" "I've never seen that before." Detective Crawford took out a small tool from his pocket and worked on the lock for less than a minute before it popped open. Inside were dozens of documents, and as he began sorting through them, his expression grew increasingly grim. He didn't say anything, just photographed each document carefully, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. "What is it?" I asked, unable to bear the silence. "What did you find?" He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than anything that had happened so far. Pity. Deep, profound pity. "Mrs. Washington, I think you should sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me what's in that box." He hesitated, then pulled out a document and handed it to me. It was a power of attorney form, dated 3 months earlier, with my signature at the bottom. Except I'd never signed any power of attorney. I'd never even seen this document before. "This gives your granddaughter complete legal authority over your financial affairs, medical decisions, and property," Detective Crawford explained quietly. With this document, she could have sold your house without your knowledge, accessed all your accounts legally, even made decisions about your health care. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the paper. But I never signed this. This isn't my signature. I know. It's a forgery, and a fairly good one. But there are small differences that a handwriting expert will be able to identify. He pulled out another document. This is worse, Mrs. Washington. This is a petition for guardianship, claiming you're mentally incompetent and unable to manage your own affairs. It's dated 2 weeks from now, but it's already filled out and ready to file with the court. The room started spinning around me. I grabbed onto the doorframe to steady myself. What are you saying? What does this mean? It means your granddaughter and her boyfriend were planning to have you declared legally incompetent. With this guardianship petition and the forged power of attorney, they could have had you committed to a nursing home against your will, sold your house, taken complete control of all your assets, and you would have had almost no legal recourse to stop them. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating, like I was drowning in my own home. But I'm not incompetent. I'm perfectly healthy. I work full-time. How could they possibly convince a court that I'm unable to manage my own life? Detective Crawford pulled out more papers from the file box. They've been building a case. Here's a letter allegedly from your primary care physician stating concerns about your memory and cognitive function. Here's a statement from Marcus claiming he witnessed you leaving the stove on multiple times, forgetting to take your medication, getting confused about dates and appointments. Here's a sworn affidavit from someone named Deacon Michael Turner stating he's observed significant mental decline over the past year. That name hit me like a physical blow. Deacon Turner. He was a member of my church, someone I'd known for 15 years, someone I'd trusted and respected. He'd been coming to my house more frequently over the past 6 months, always saying he wanted to check on me, make sure I was doing okay, offering to help with errands or household tasks. I'd thought he was just being kind, being a good Christian neighbor. But he'd been gathering evidence against me, documenting supposed incidents of confusion and forgetfulness that never happened, building a false narrative of mental decline to support Crystal's guardianship petition. This can't be happening, I whispered. Deacon Turner wouldn't do this. He's a man of God. He's been a friend for years. Mrs. Washington, look at this. Detective Crawford showed me another document, a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before. It showed a payment of $5,000 to Michael Turner, dated 2 months earlier, with the memo line reading, "Consulting Services." Your granddaughter paid him. He was part of the conspiracy. I sank down onto Crystal's bed, all the strength draining out of my legs. This wasn't just Crystal and Marcus. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple people I'd trusted, people who'd looked me in the eye and smiled while they plotted to destroy my autonomy, my freedom, my entire life. They'd been planning to have me declared incompetent, to lock me away in a nursing home where I'd have no control over my own existence, where I'd be drugged and docile and unable to fight back while they liquidated everything I'd worked my entire life to build. There's more, Detective Crawford said gently. In the file box, there's a contract with Riverside Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, a long-term care facility in Maryland. It's already signed by Crystal using her forged power of attorney, committing you to their memory care unit for an indefinite period. The monthly cost is $8,000. $8,000 a month. My savings would have been gone in less than a year. And then what? Would they have just left me there to rot, to become a ward of the state, to die alone and forgotten in some institutional bed? I felt bile rising in my throat. How could she do this? I asked, not really expecting an answer. How could my own granddaughter, the little girl I raised, the child I sacrificed everything for, plan something so evil? Detective Crawford carefully packed all the documents into evidence bags. Money makes people do terrible things, Mrs. Washington. And when someone feels entitled to that money, when they convince themselves they deserve it more than the person who actually earned it, they can justify almost anything. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Now we build a case. This isn't just identity theft anymore. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and possibly attempted kidnapping depending on how the DA wants to charge the guardianship scheme. We're looking at multiple felonies, multiple conspirators, and based on the sophistication of this operation, I'd say they probably had help from someone with legal expertise. A lawyer? Most likely. Someone helped them draft these documents, advise them on the legal process for guardianship petitions, probably help them create the forged medical records. He looked at me seriously. Mrs. Washington, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Has your granddaughter or Marcus introduced you to any lawyers recently? Anyone who offered to help you with estate planning or updating your will? My heart stopped. Yes, I breathed. About 4 months ago, Crystal said she was worried about me not having proper legal documents in place. She introduced me to a lawyer named David Hutchinson, said he was a friend of Marcus's family, that he'd give me a good deal on setting up a will and some other paperwork. We had one meeting at his office, and I gave him copies of all my financial documents, my birth certificate, my social security card, everything. He said he needed them to draft the proper legal documents. Detective Crawford's expression darkened. Did he ever actually provide you with those documents? He said he was working on them, that it would take a few weeks. Then he said there were some complications, that he needed to revise things. Then he stopped returning my calls. Crystal said he'd gotten busy with other cases, but that he'd get back to me eventually. I just figured these things took time. Mrs. Washington, I think David Hutchinson was using that meeting to gather all the information he needed to forge your signature and create fraudulent documents. I'm going to need his full name, his office address, and any contact information you have for him. I gave him everything I could remember, watching as he wrote it all down in his notebook. The scope of the betrayal kept expanding, like ripples spreading across dark water. It wasn't just Crystal and Marcus. It wasn't just Deacon Turner. There was a lawyer involved, someone who'd used his professional credentials and my trust to facilitate this elaborate scheme to steal my life. If you're still watching, if this story is making you realize that betrayal can come from the people we trust most, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Elder abuse is more common than anyone wants to admit, and the only way we can fight it is by talking about it openly, by refusing to let these predators operate in the shadows. Share this story, and let's protect our elders together. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Crawford's investigation uncovered a conspiracy so extensive it made national news. David Hutchinson was indeed a lawyer, but he'd been disbarred 3 years earlier for ethics violations. He'd continued to practice illegally, targeting elderly clients through family members who brought him business. Crystal and Marcus had paid him $15,000, my money, stolen from my accounts, to create the forged documents and guide them through the guardianship process. He'd done this before, at least 6 times that investigators could document, helping younger family members seize control of their elderly relatives' assets through fraudulent guardianship petitions. Deacon Turner admitted everything once the police confronted him with the bank records showing Crystal's payments. He claimed he'd been desperate, that he was facing foreclosure on his house, that Crystal had offered him what seemed like easy money just for writing a statement about my supposed mental decline. He swore he didn't know the full extent of their plan, that he thought they were just trying to get me into assisted living for my own good. I didn't believe him. Nobody who knew me could honestly think I needed assisted living. He'd knowingly participated in destroying my reputation and my autonomy for $5,000. The most devastating discovery came when detectives analyzed Crystal's laptop. They found detailed planning documents, spreadsheets calculating exactly how much money they'd get from selling my house and liquidating my assets, email exchanges with Hutchinson discussing the timeline for the guardianship petition, and most horrifying of all, text messages between Crystal and Marcus discussing what they called Phase 2. Detective Crawford showed me those messages in his office one gray afternoon, and I felt whatever remained of my heart shatter into irreparable pieces. Crystal, once we get her into Riverside, how long do you think before Phase 2? Marcus, Hutchinson says we need to wait at least 6 months to avoid suspicion. Let her get settled, establish the pattern of decline, then we can move forward. Crystal, 6 months is a long time. That's 6 months of paying $8,000 for the facility. Marcus, but then it's over and we're free. No more surveillance, no more risk, just like we planned. I looked up at Detective Crawford with tears streaming down my face. What's Phase 2? I asked, though part of me already knew, though part of me had been trying desperately not to understand what I was reading. He was quiet for a long moment. We don't have explicit evidence of what they meant by Phase 2, but based on the context of their other communications, based on consultation with our behavioral analysis unit, we believe they were planning to hasten your death once you were institutionalized, possibly through medication mismanagement, possibly through convincing doctors you needed to be on palliative care, possibly through other means that would appear natural for someone in a nursing home with supposed dementia. The room went dark around the edges. My own granddaughter, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd comforted through nightmares, the teenager I'd guided through heartbreak and confusion, the young woman I'd celebrated with at her graduation. She'd been planning to kill me. Not in a moment of passion or rage, not accidentally, but methodically, deliberately, as part of a calculated plan to inherit my assets sooner rather than later. She was going to murder me, I said aloud, needing to hear the words, needing to make them real. My granddaughter was going to have me committed to a nursing home and then murder me. We believed that was their intent, yes. They would have been patient, would have waited until you were isolated and vulnerable, until your cognitive decline was so well established that no one would question your death. It's called inheritance impatience in criminology. Some people can't wait for their relatives to die naturally, so they orchestrate situations that accelerate the process while maintaining plausible deniability. I thought about Crystal bringing me tea every evening, always so thoughtful, always so caring. Had she been practicing? Planning how she'd eventually deliver whatever poison or overdose would end my life once I was locked away in Riverside? I thought about Marcus's cold eyes, the way he'd studied me during family dinners like I was a problem to be solved. I thought about Deacon Turner asking detailed questions about my health, my medications, my daily routines. They'd all been gathering intelligence, building their case, preparing for my destruction. What happens to them now? I asked. They've all been arrested and charged. Crystal and Marcus are facing conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, and multiple other charges. David Hutchinson is facing similar charges, plus illegal practice of law. Deacon Turner is charged as an accessory. The DA is pushing for maximum sentences given the premeditated nature of the conspiracy and the vulnerability of the victim. Maximum sentences. How long? Crystal and Marcus could each face 25 years to life. Hutchinson could face 30 years. Turner could face 10 to 15 years as an accessory. 25 years to life. My granddaughter, who was 27 years old, would be over 50 by the time she got out of prison, if she ever got out at all. Her entire life destroyed by greed and entitlement and the belief that she deserved my money more than I deserved my freedom and my life. I should have felt satisfaction, should have felt justice being served, should have felt relief that they'd been stopped before they could execute their plan. But all I felt was grief so profound it was almost physical, a weight pressing down on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd lost my daughter to a drunk driver, and now I'd lost my granddaughter to her own moral corruption. I was alone in a way I'd never been alone before, surrounded by the wreckage of what I'd thought was my family. "Mrs. Washington," Detective Crawford said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else you need to know. The investigation has expanded. We've been looking into Crystal's finances, trying to understand where all the money she stole actually went, because $90,000 is a lot to spend in 18 months, even with their extravagant lifestyle. Where did it go? They invested most of it in a cryptocurrency scheme that promised massive returns. Marcus had been involved in this operation for over a year, had brought Crystal into it, convinced her that if they could just get enough capital together, they'd make millions. They lost everything. Every dollar they stole from you, they poured into this fraudulent investment, and it all disappeared. They weren't even successful criminals. They were greedy, desperate, and spectacularly stupid. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, at the tragic farce of my granddaughter destroying both our lives for money she didn't even get to keep. She'd stolen my life savings, forged my signature, conspired to have me institutionalized and murdered, ruined her own future and freedom. And for what? For nothing. For a scam that left her with nothing but debt and criminal charges and a prison sentence that would consume the best years of her life. But what I couldn't have known then, what wouldn't be revealed until the trial 6 months later, was that there was one more person involved in this conspiracy. Someone I'd trusted even more than I'd trusted Crystal. Someone whose betrayal would hurt worse than everything else combined. And when that person's identity was finally revealed in open court, when I heard the testimony and saw the evidence, I would realize that the entire foundation of my life for the past 23 years had been built on lies, manipulation, and calculated exploitation. The person who'd been pulling the strings all along wasn't who anyone expected, and their motive was so twisted, so personal, so rooted in ancient grudges and jealousies that it would make me question everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the daughter I'd lost all those years ago in that car accident on Interstate 95. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in March, exactly 7 months after I'd found that credit card in Crystal's desk drawer. I sat in the courtroom wearing my best navy blue suit, the one I'd bought for Crystal's college graduation, and I tried not to look at the defense table where my granddaughter sat between her lawyers, her head down, her hands folded in her lap. She'd lost weight in jail, her face gaunt and hollow, dark circles under her eyes. Part of me still wanted to reach out to her, still wanted to comfort her the way I'd comforted her through every pain and disappointment of her life. But that part was fighting against the larger part that knew what she'd planned to do to me, the part that remembered those text messages about Phase 2, the part that understood she'd been willing to kill me for money she didn't even get to keep. Marcus sat beside her, looking defiant and angry, his jaw clenched tight. David Hutchinson, the disbarred lawyer, was being tried separately. Deacon Turner had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. I'd seen him once since his arrest, at a preliminary hearing, and he couldn't even look at me, just hung his head and stared at his hands like a coward. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 50s named Angela Morrison, had explained to me that this trial would be difficult, that I'd have to hear terrible things, that the defense would try to paint me as a difficult, controlling grandmother who'd pushed Crystal to desperate measures. She'd warned me that they'd attack my character, question my memory, suggest I was partly responsible for what happened. I'd told her I didn't care what they said about me, that all I wanted was the truth to come out, for justice to be served, for other elderly people to see what happened to me and be more careful about who they trusted. The first week of testimony was brutal. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. Bank records showing the theft, the forged documents, the guardianship petition, the text messages planning my murder. They called Detective Crawford, who walked the jury through the investigation. They called forensic accountants who detailed exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. They called the administrator from Riverside Nursing Home, who confirmed that Crystal had signed me up for their memory care unit using forged power of attorney, that the deposit had been paid, that they'd been expecting me to arrive within the month. I testified on the 4th day. Angela Morrison asked me to tell my story from the beginning, and I did, starting with Monica's death and Crystal coming to live with me as a traumatized 2-year-old. I talked about the sacrifices I'd made, the double shifts I'd worked, the dreams I'd deferred so she could have opportunities. I talked about discovering the theft, about confronting her, about the horror of finding those documents in her room. And I talked about what it felt like to read those text messages, to realize my own granddaughter had been planning to murder me. Mrs. Washington, Angela asked gently, did you ever, at any point, do anything to make your granddaughter fear you or feel she couldn't come to you with problems? Never, I said, my voice breaking. I loved her more than my own life. I would have given her anything she needed. If she was struggling financially, if she was in trouble, all she had to do was ask. I would have helped her. I would have done anything for her. The defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named Robert Fielding, cross-examined me aggressively. He asked about my relationship with Crystal, suggested I'd been overbearing and controlling, implied I'd made her feel guilty about the sacrifices I'd made for her. He asked if I'd been having memory problems, if I'd been confused about dates or events, if I'd forgotten conversations or appointments. He was trying to suggest that maybe the guardianship petition wasn't entirely fraudulent, that maybe I did need help managing my affairs. I answered every question calmly, precisely, providing specific examples and dates that proved my memory was sharp and my mind was clear. I watched him grow frustrated as he realized I wasn't the confused, declining elderly woman he'd hoped to present to the jury. Then came the second week of trial, and that's when everything changed. Angela Morrison called a witness I hadn't been expecting, someone whose name I hadn't heard in years. The prosecution calls Patricia Green to the stand. I sat up straighter, my heart suddenly pounding. Patricia Green. That was Monica's best friend from high school, someone who'd been at the hospital when Monica died, who'd helped me with funeral arrangements, who'd visited a few times after Crystal came to live with me, but had eventually drifted away as people do after tragedy. I hadn't thought about her in probably 15 years. Why was she testifying? A woman walked into the courtroom, and it took me a moment to recognize her. She was in her late 40s now, her dark hair cut short, wearing a simple black dress and carrying herself with an almost militant posture. She was sworn in and sat down in the witness box, her eyes scanning the courtroom before landing on me. And in that moment, I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. "Ms. Green," Angela Morrison began, "can you tell the court how you know the defendant, Crystal Washington?" "I've known Crystal since she was born," Patricia said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I was Monica's best friend. I was there the day Crystal was born. I was there the day Monica died." "And have you maintained contact with Crystal over the years?" "Yes. After Monica died and Crystal went to live with her grandmother, I made it a point to stay in touch. I visited regularly when Crystal was young, took her out for ice cream, called her on her birthday. As she got older, we stayed connected through social media and occasional phone calls." "When did your relationship with Crystal change?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "About 3 years ago, Crystal reached out to me. She said she was struggling, that living with her grandmother was difficult, that she felt trapped and controlled. She said she needed advice about her future, about her relationship with her grandmother." My stomach dropped. 3 years ago. That was a year before the theft started, 2 years before I found that credit card. Crystal had been planning this, building support, creating a narrative of me as a controlling, difficult grandmother for years before she ever stole a penny from me. "And did you provide that advice?" Angela asked. "I did. I told her the truth about her grandmother. I told her what really happened the night Monica died." The courtroom went completely silent. I couldn't breathe. What was she talking about? What truth? Monica had died in a car accident, killed by a drunk driver on Interstate 95. What other truth could there possibly be? Angela Morrison approached the witness stand. "Ms. Green, I need you to be very clear about what you're telling this court. What truth did you tell Crystal about her grandmother?" Patricia looked directly at me, and I saw tears forming in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage that had been festering for over 2 decades. I told her that Evelyn Washington killed her mother. I told her that Monica's death wasn't an accident. I told her the truth that I've kept silent about for 23 years because I thought protecting Crystal from it was more important than getting justice. But I was wrong. Crystal deserved to know what her grandmother really was. The courtroom exploded. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to process what I just heard. I killed Monica? That was insane. That was a lie. Monica died in a car accident. A drunk driver hit her. The police investigated. It was ruled an accident. What was this woman talking about? Angela Morrison looked as shocked as I felt, but she pressed forward. "Ms. Green, these are very serious allegations. Can you explain to the court what you mean?" Patricia wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Monica and Evelyn had a terrible fight the night Monica died. Monica had told her mother earlier that day that she was leaving, that she was taking Crystal and moving to Atlanta to live with Crystal's father. Evelyn went into a rage. She told Monica she was an unfit mother, that she'd never let her take Crystal away, that she'd fight for custody and make sure Monica never saw her daughter again. Monica was devastated. She called me crying, said her mother had been cruel and vicious, said things she'd never said before. Monica got in her car to drive to my house to get away from her mother. She was crying so hard she could barely see. I told her to pull over, to wait until she calmed down, but she was too upset. And then, Patricia's voice broke, and then she hit that drunk driver. If Evelyn hadn't attacked her like that, hadn't sent her out into the night in that emotional state, Monica would still be alive. Evelyn killed her daughter as surely as if she'd been driving the car that hit her. I stood up, shaking, my voice coming out as a scream I couldn't control. "That's a lie. That's a vicious, evil lie. Monica and I never fought that night. She never said anything about moving to Atlanta. Where is this coming from?" The judge banged his gavel again. "Mrs. Washington, sit down or I'll have you removed from the courtroom." Detective Crawford was beside me, his hand on my shoulder, gently pushing me back into my seat. "Let the prosecutor handle this," he whispered urgently. "Don't give them ammunition to use against you." Angela Morrison's face had gone hard. "Your Honor, I'd like a brief recess to consult with my witness. This testimony was not disclosed in discovery, and I need to verify these allegations before we proceed." But Robert Fielding, Crystal's defense attorney, was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, Ms. Green is the prosecution's witness. They called her to the stand. They don't get to take a recess just because they don't like what she's saying. I'd like to cross-examine. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Cross-examination may proceed, but Ms. Morrison, we will be having a discussion about discovery violation. Mr. Fielding, you may question the witness. Fielding approached Patricia with barely concealed excitement. This was exactly the kind of testimony he'd been hoping for, something that could shift the entire narrative of the trial. Ms. Green, you've known the defendant Crystal Washington her entire life, is that correct? Yes. And you've maintained a relationship with her based on your love for her deceased mother? Yes. When Crystal came to you 3 years ago expressing concerns about her grandmother, about feeling controlled and trapped, what advice did you give her? Patricia hesitated, and I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty? Guilt? I told her she needed to be independent, that she needed to break free from her grandmother's influence. Did you tell her anything else? Did you suggest any specific actions she should take? Another hesitation. I may have mentioned that as Monica's daughter, Crystal had a right to the assets Evelyn had built up over the years, that Monica would have wanted her daughter to be taken care of. Did you suggest that Crystal might need to take action to secure those assets? I told her she needed to be smart about her future, that's all. Ms. Green, did you have any contact with David Hutchinson, the lawyer who helped Crystal create the fraudulent documents? Patricia's face went pale. I knew David. We'd met at a church function. Did you introduce David Hutchinson to Crystal and Marcus? I may have mentioned that David could help them with legal matters, yes. The pieces were falling into place, and I could see Angela Morrison's face darkening as she realized what had happened. Patricia hadn't just been a passive confidant offering advice. She'd been actively involved in the conspiracy, manipulating Crystal, introducing her to co-conspirators, nurturing her resentment and sense of entitlement. And she'd done it all under the guise of avenging Monica's death, of getting justice for her dead best friend by destroying the mother she blamed for that death. If you're watching this and you're feeling the same rage I felt in that courtroom, if you're understanding how deep manipulation can go and how betrayal can be wrapped in the language of love and justice, then please comment below. Tell me your story. Let's create a community where we can heal together from the wounds that family and false friends inflict. Because I'm telling you right now, the isolation is the worst part. The feeling that you're alone in this nightmare. You're not alone. I'm here, and I see you, and together we're going to make sure these stories get told. Fielding continued his cross-examination, and with each question, more of the truth emerged. Patricia had been the one who'd suggested the guardianship scheme. Patricia had introduced them to Hutchinson. Patricia had helped them understand how to forge documents, how to build a case for incompetency, how to isolate me and make me vulnerable. She'd done it all while telling Crystal it was justice, that it was what Monica would have wanted, that I deserved to lose everything because I'd killed her mother through my supposed cruelty that night. But the night Patricia was describing, the terrible fight she claimed happened, never occurred. I knew it in my bones, knew it with the certainty of absolute truth. Monica and I had never fought about her moving to Atlanta. Crystal's father had never been in the picture enough for Monica to even consider moving to be with him. There had been no rage, no threats about custody, no cruel words. Monica had been coming home from her waitressing shift that night. She'd called me from the restaurant to tell me she'd be late, that she was tired, but she'd be home soon. We'd made plans to take Crystal to the park the next day. The last words my daughter said to me were, "I love you, Mama. See you soon." The drunk driver who hit her had been going 70 miles an hour in a 45 zone. The police report showed no evidence that Monica had been driving erratically or emotionally. She'd been in the right lane, following all traffic laws, when that man's truck crossed the median and hit her head-on. She'd died instantly. The investigation found no fault on her part. It was a tragedy, a terrible accident, not the result of some fictional fight with me. But Patricia had constructed this alternative narrative, this lie that cast me as the villain responsible for Monica's death, and she'd fed it to Crystal year after year, poisoning my granddaughter's mind against me, creating a foundation of resentment and blame that made Crystal capable of believing I deserved to have my life stolen, my freedom taken, my existence erased. Ms. Green, Angela Morrison said during her redirect examination, her voice sharp as a blade. "Do you have any proof of this alleged fight between Monica and Mrs. Washington? Any witnesses? Any documentation? Anything beyond your word?" Patricia's confidence wavered. "Monica told me about it on the phone. But you have no recording of that phone call? No text messages, no emails? Nothing that actually proves this conversation happened? It was 23 years ago. People didn't record everything back then. Were there any witnesses to this alleged fight?" "No, but Monica wouldn't lie to me." "Ms. Green, isn't it true that you've had a long-standing grudge against Mrs. Washington? Isn't it true that after Monica's death, when Mrs. Washington was awarded custody of Crystal, you petitioned for custody yourself and were denied?" I sat up straighter. I'd forgotten about that. Patricia had tried to take Crystal from me, had argued to the court that as Monica's best friend, she should raise Monica's daughter. The judge had ruled in my favor, had determined that Crystal belonged with her grandmother, her blood family. Patricia had been angry, had accused me of poisoning the court against her, had eventually stopped visiting altogether. I'd thought she'd just moved on with her life. I'd never imagined she'd spent the next 2 decades nursing that grudge, waiting for an opportunity to strike back at me. "That's not relevant," Patricia said, but her voice was shaky now. "Isn't it true that you've resented Mrs. Washington for over 20 years? That you blamed her for getting custody of Crystal when you wanted that child for yourself? I wanted what was best for Crystal, and you decided what was best for Crystal was to manipulate her into destroying her grandmother's life, to feed her lies about her mother's death, to introduce her to criminals who would help her steal everything Mrs. Washington had worked for, to encourage a plan that would have resulted in Mrs. Washington being institutionalized and possibly murdered. I never wanted anyone to be murdered. I just wanted Crystal to understand the truth about her grandmother. I wanted her to be free. Free, Angela said coldly. Free with Mrs. Washington's money. Free with Mrs. Washington's house. Free after Mrs. Washington was locked away in a nursing home where she couldn't defend herself or tell her side of the story. That's the freedom you wanted for Crystal, isn't it, Ms. Green? And all of it based on a lie you've been telling for 23 years to justify your own jealousy and resentment. Patricia broke down crying on the stand, and in that moment, I finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't just about Crystal's greed or Marcus's manipulation or Hutchinson's criminal expertise. This was about a woman who'd loved my daughter, who'd wanted my daughter's child, who'd resented me for being the one who got to keep Crystal when Monica died. Patricia had spent over 2 decades waiting for her chance to destroy me. And when Crystal became an adult struggling with her own issues, Patricia had found her weapon. She'd taken my granddaughter, the girl I loved more than my own life, and turned her into an instrument of revenge. The trial lasted another week. Detective Crawford testified about discovering Patricia's involvement, about phone records showing hundreds of calls between Patricia and Crystal over the past 3 years, about financial records showing Patricia had also received payments from the money Crystal stole. The prosecutor brought in experts who examined the police report from Monica's accident and confirmed there was no evidence of the fight Patricia claimed had happened, that Monica's emotional state had been normal, that the accident was entirely the fault of the drunk driver. Crystal herself testified, and watching her on the stand was the hardest thing I've ever done. She admitted everything, the theft, the forgery, the guardianship scheme. But she also talked about how Patricia had convinced her that I was responsible for her mother's death, how she'd grown up believing I'd driven Monica to her death through cruelty and control. She talked about how much she'd resented me, how trapped she'd felt, how Patricia had made her believe that taking my assets wasn't theft but justice, wasn't crime, but retribution. "Did you plan to kill your grandmother?" Angela Morrison asked her directly. Crystal looked at me for the first time since the trial started, and I saw tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "We talked about phase 2, about what would happen after she was in the nursing home, but we never explicitly said, I don't know if I could have actually gone through with it. I want to believe I couldn't have, but I was so convinced that she'd killed my mother, that she deserved to suffer, that I wasn't thinking clearly about what we were really planning. I was wrong. About everything. Patricia lied to me. My grandmother never hurt my mother, and I destroyed both our lives because I believed a lie." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, they found Crystal guilty of all charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus was found guilty on the same charges. Patricia Green was found guilty as an accessory to all counts and as the primary architect of the conspiracy. Crystal was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Marcus got 25. Patricia got 18 years. Hutchinson, tried separately, received 30 years. Deacon Turner, who'd taken his plea deal, got 5 years. I sat through all the sentencing hearings, watched each of them be led away in handcuffs, and felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no sense of justice being served. Just emptiness. Just the profound awareness that my family was gone, that the girl I'd raised was lost to me forever, that I was 65 years old and completely, utterly alone. After the trial, after the media attention died down, after the reporters stopped calling and the victims' advocates stopped checking in and life returned to some semblance of normalcy, I sold my house. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't walk through those rooms without seeing ghosts of Crystal at every age, without hearing her laughter and her voice calling me Grandma. I moved to a small apartment in a senior community in Virginia, started fresh in a place where no one knew my story. Detective Crawford stayed in touch, called me every few weeks to check on me, make sure I was okay. Angela Morrison sent me a card on the first anniversary of the verdict, thanking me for my strength during the trial. Some members of my church reached out, though I'd stopped attending after Deacon Turner's betrayal made it impossible for me to trust anyone there. I rebuilt my finances slowly, recovered most of what was stolen through restitution orders that would probably take decades to be fully paid, if they ever were. I got a part-time job as a receptionist at a dentist's office, not because I needed the money, but because I needed something to do, some way to fill the hours that had once been filled with loving and caring for Crystal. On what would have been Monica's 48th birthday, I visited her grave for the first time since the trial. I knelt in the grass beside her headstone, and I talked to her, told her everything that had happened, told her how sorry I was that I couldn't protect Crystal from Patricia's poison, couldn't save her from the path she'd chosen. I told Monica that I'd loved her daughter with everything I had, that I'd tried my best, that I'd failed in the end, but that I'd never stop trying. And then I told her the truth I'd been avoiding, the truth I'd been running from since the moment I found that credit card in Crystal's desk. I told her that despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the theft, despite the plan to institutionalize and murder me, I still loved Crystal. That love didn't just disappear because someone hurt you. That I would carry that love and that pain for the rest of my life, would go to my grave loving the little girl who'd crawled into my lap after nightmares, even though that little girl had grown into a woman who'd tried to destroy me. 3 years have passed since the trial. Crystal writes to me sometimes from prison. I don't write back, but I read every letter. She apologizes over and over, says she understands if I can never forgive her, says she's in therapy trying to understand how she could have believed Patricia's lies, how she could have been capable of such cruelty. She says she thinks about me every day, that she's sorry every day, that she'd give anything to go back and make different choices. I believe her. I believe she's genuinely sorry. But I also know that sorry doesn't undo the damage, doesn't erase the betrayal, doesn't give me back the years of peace and security she stole from me. Sorry is just a word, and words can't fix what's been broken between us. My name is Evelyn Washington. I'm 68 years old now. I survived my daughter's death, my husband's death, my granddaughter's betrayal, and a conspiracy that nearly cost me my freedom, my dignity, and my life. I'm here to tell you that betrayal by family is the deepest wound you can suffer, that it changes you in ways you can never fully recover from. But I'm also here to tell you that you can survive it. You can build a new life. You can find meaning and purpose even after everything you loved has been taken from you. If my story has touched you, if it's opened your eyes to the reality of elder abuse and family betrayal, if it's made you want to protect the elderly people in your life or recognize the warning signs in your own relationships, then share this video. Share it widely. Share it boldly. Because these stories need to be told, these truths need to be spoken, and the only way we protect vulnerable people is by refusing to let predators operate in the shadows of family loyalty and assumed trust. I gave Crystal everything, and she gave me the hardest lesson I've ever learned. That love alone isn't enough to protect you from betrayal, that trust can be weaponized by people you die for, that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we've sacrificed everything to save. But I survived. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And if you're going through something similar, if you're feeling that same devastating betrayal, I want you to know that you can survive too. You're stronger than you think. You're worth more than what they tried to take from you. And your story, like mine, deserves to be told. Thank you for listening to my truth. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain. And thank you for helping me prove that even when everything is taken from you, even when the people you love most betray you in the cruelest ways possible, you can still stand up, dust yourself off, and reclaim your life. Because in the end, that's the greatest revenge. Not destruction, but survival. Not bitterness, but resilience. Not giving up, but going on. My name is Evelyn Washington, and this is my story.